Certain last names no MHS student will ever forget pursuant to the time they were in high school. McBrone, Hurley, Clark, Griffin, Makeley, Lewis, Ruane, and Burke. What do they all have in common? These men all served or are serving as Memorial High School principal. What does it take to be Memorial High School principal? Is today's principalship the same as the 1960s principalship? We here at Rider Nation Station wanted to know these answers, so we sought out the expertise of retired principal Quint Clark and current principal Jonathan Burke. Gentlemen, thanks for being here tonight. And I truly feel like I've been sent to the principal's office sitting in between the two of you. So, Jonathan, we'll start with you. Why did you want to become a principal, and what did it take in modern standards to become a principal?
I didn't want to be a principal. I never thought I was going to be a principal. I became a teacher, and I knew really early I was going to be a teacher. I had Al Meinerding in 7th grade as my teacher, and he kind of convinced me to be a teacher because I was mentoring other kids in his classroom. When I got in the classroom, I was getting pulled out of the classroom so much by administration for different things. I became a union leader early on. I was only a 3-year veteran teacher, and I was our union president negotiating, and I was meeting with our superintendent on a monthly basis. And my 5th year teaching, he said, you need to go get your principal's endorsement. So I started doing that, and about halfway through my program, there's an assistant principal job at St. Mary's Middle School. We were having our first son was 1 year old, and it just seemed like the right time to move back to St. Mary's. We grew up here, my wife and I did. So that's honestly what got me into being a principal. And then I've spent 4 years with Mary Miller as the middle school principal there. And this is my first year as Memorial High School principal, and I've loved it. And I miss teaching, and that's why I continue to coach. I'm the head coach of the girls basketball team. I miss that relationship with kids and every day, and having that relationship that you build, good times and bad. So that's why I continue to coach, even though it does take a lot of time. But every once in a while I'll have regrets, but it's mostly that touch with the kids.
Mm-hmm. So the dynamics change a little bit from colleague to colleague, and obviously teacher to student when you do take that administrative role. Mm-hmm. And I might add that both of these gentlemen were also Memorial High School graduates as well. So we'll turn it over to Quint. Jonathan, I believe you were a 2005
Correct.
Graduate, and Quint, 53 grad?
Correct.
Okay, and Quint, why did you want to become a principal? I know you started off as a teacher here at the high school, returning to your alma mater.
I taught for 8 years, enjoyed it very much like Jonathan. You have that good contact with the students day to day, and you miss that when you become an administrator. So basically I went to Miami and got my principalship certificate, and an opening came. Mr. Hurley had finished up and was retiring, and I thought it was a chance to maybe have a greater effect upon the entire educational process through the principalship. So I made an application, and the board accepted it, and I became the principal.
And you served as principal for quite
22 years.
22 years. I believe it was the end of my sophomore year when you retired in 1987.
87. Mm-hmm.
So let's delve in a little bit into some topics that you currently have to deal with and that you had to deal with for 22 years as the top educator of the high school. And the first one that I think comes to mind for a lot is testing. We hear a lot, especially today, the state needs this testing done and this testing done, and some people say we barely have time to get education done because we're always preparing for testing. So is that somewhat accurate, or is that an over-embellishment? What is testing like in today's standards at Memorial High School?
Our kids are spending a lot of time testing. I'm not sure how much standardized testing you had when you were principal.
Very little at the beginning, especially. Yeah.
Right. So, when I first became the assistant principal at the middle school, we had paper testing and the tracking of every single test booklet. And if one was missing, you got dinged from the state. That was cumbersome, and we would take weeks, and the testing security and making sure you weren't violating anything was very stressful. And Now everything's done online, which is very helpful administratively because the kids, you just set it up, kids go on there, they test, you just make sure every kid tests. However, our freshmen just took 3 tests between American history, English, and Algebra 1. Our sophomores are taking 4 tests. They're taking geometry, English, government, and a biology test. So all in 1 month, which just, it's a break in basically all of April we're spending in the computer labs testing. And then we also have student growth measures that our teachers have to meet for teacher performance. Our Ohio Teacher Evaluation System makes us do 50% what I observe and give feedback on, and 50% is a student growth measure. So all those teachers have either the AIR test that we take, the state standardized test, or if they don't have that state standardized test, they have to do what we call an SLO, where they make their own test, give it to the kids at the beginning of the class, they take it again at the end of the year, and they have to meet so much growth. So those 2 processes are taking a lot of time away from the kids. I can handle it on my side. Yes, it's another burden, but that's time that kids are doing test prep, review, actually testing, and it's taken away from instruction. So that's unfortunate.
How long does it take to get the results back?
for our kids tested in April, and we won't get the results back till mid-July at best.
So Quint, you just heard what Principal Burke has to deal with testing coming down from the state. What do you recall from testing? I know you said you didn't really have much standardized testing in the beginning.
Well, one we used to have what we called the every pupil tests, in which they were all subject matter related, and so you'd have the testing and you would pick your best students. I think it was the top 3, and they would then be tested in that particular subject matter, such as Latin or English or algebra, and then the state would grade and then give the results and send out how your students did. And I remember Amos Steva was the Latin teacher, and of course he had his students, good students, but he would prep them very well, and he would always come out with a high ranking. So it was a good PR thing.
Sure. When
our students showed up well in these subject matters. And of course you were just starting to do the merit, PSAT, and those tests were being given, and occasionally you would have, with good students, you'd have some merit scholars, I think they called them, and finalists, and those were mainly, I think, the testing was done.
So for the every pupil test, going back to that, did I understand correctly, that was just for a certain select students, or was that the entire student body?
No, the teacher would pick your top team. And so each subject had maybe 4 members on the team.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
That would be interesting.
See how you compare.
Our teachers would like that a lot.
Yes. Oh, well, that's very, very interesting. So obviously some similarities, that there was the testing, but obviously some major differences. I don't think they were being done on computer.
No, we weren't doing them on
during
computers.
your tenure there. And that's just been a slow process to go from paper and pencil to the computer. And do the kids like it that way, or would they rather go back to the old school paper and pencil? Any thoughts?
I think it depends. I think most of the tests, I think they like to be on computer because most kids are better typers than writers by this point now. Math, I think, is the challenge. I think most kids would rather manipulate a graphing calculator, paper, pencil, and I think the teachers would agree. It's just different taking a math test and the rhythm of the... Okay. I'm a former math teacher, too. Yeah. So I think just the rhythm of the paper hitting the pencil hitting the paper just means a little bit different when you're clicking buttons on a computer.
Okay. Well, we're going to transition from testing to accessibility to the principal. So if you had a parent that really needed to convey something positively or negatively to you, Quint, what do you recall about those steps to reach you? Was it just during the day? What do you remember?
I think mainly during the day, and usually the parent would give us a heads up by calling to make an appointment. And they had concerns, and of course our position was to listen to their concerns and, if we could, react to them, either positively or negatively. They didn't always have the best answer, but there were some good things that came out of such a meeting. So we always thought we had, or we consider ourselves to have an open door policy for parents, because that's the public, and,
Right.
and that's what you're serving.
Right. Now, would they call you at home or?
Had relatively few calls at home.
Okay. So pretty
Always
fortunate.
appreciated that.
Always pretty fortunate
Right.
there. Or
Our life at home became our own, and
Yeah.
it wasn't always,
or could you go to Pantry Pride without getting bounced about something?
usually.
Okay. Well, good. Well, let's see what it's like today.
I think cell phones have definitely made a change. At least I know when I was assistant principal, I had a number of parents just in my contact list. It was easier to text. A lot of parents are at work and they just want a quick checkup, or hey, what's going on? Is my kid staying after school? Now, as the principal, it's a little bit different. I'm still getting texts, but it's mostly about, hey, we're trying to get things set up for after prom. We've got different events coming in. We've got parents that are running meetings and banquets in the evening. So, how am I going to get the keys? What do we need to do? Like the sound booth, how do we get that set up? How do we get the sound turned on and just right? The gates aren't opening. So I'm definitely more accessible than you would have been.
Yeah.
But a big part of that's because of cell phones, but then social media as well. And we try to use our social media to build as much positive as we can, but also just to try to get our message out too, because sometimes there are things that happen at the school. Because we want to get our message out before the news gets it, before people start kind of maybe making things up.
You have to tell your
drawing
narrative. You have to
assumptions.
tell the narrative before the
Right.
narrative gets made.
Right. So, and we want to keep our parents in the loop. We don't want anybody going home and hearing from their kid,
Right.
hey, this happened, and why didn't that teacher or that principal call me? And I feel like St. Mary's is pretty tight-knit, and our parents deserve that knowledge. So we try to use social media, too, to just get our message out. But that also, that creates more accessible that way as well.
You have almost an instant communication,
Yeah.
where our method of getting back to the parents would have been through the telephone or word of mouth or something like
Right.
that.
Or writing a memo.
Write
that
a memo and
Gets
then
sent.
get sent, or put it in the evening leader.
Or the evening leader. And that's something I was going to bring up, that the evening leader would have been a major resource for you to help with promoting what's going on in the school. And it probably still is today. It's not been supplanted, but there's other supplementals that you mentioned with social media and just direct access that you can get the word out. So it still has an importance, but not like it would have had.
Casey Geiger, who was the editor of the paper,
Yep.
she would often attend our school functions, dances, whatever, and where that was instant reporting, and then she would get that information out. She was an excellent supporter of the schools.
And I've witnessed that through sifting through the newspapers for This Week in History and preparing for some of the vodcast. And there used to be a lot of the clubs would submit, so they probably had a correspondent or a recorder, that they would submit the activities of the club to the newspaper.
And she'd print it.
And they got printed. And one of my favorite ones, and you're going to love this, I read about the archery club. And they had their meeting and talked, a little bit about their business, and then they actually had a competition, and they reported everybody's archery score. And at the bottom, the correspondent said, and for some unknown reason, advisor Mrs. Urich's score was not publishable. Oh, and I thought that was great. And, think about that. The archery, and if I recall, in the old auditorium on the walls, there were circles. No archery club today.
We don't have archery.
I think we've gone backwards. So, talking archery and making certain that you're careful, let's transition into safety. Obviously, safety's always been a concern for the top educators and the Board of Education throughout its entirety. But things are probably a little bit different. When we had the 23 building in McBroom School, there was open access, north, south, east, west doors for people to come into. Now we have one centralized access door. So what do you recall about your safety planning, Quint, for Memorial High School?
Well, we would have, as we were talking earlier, the fire drills for safety. One thing I would mention, there were a lot of doors, as you were mentioning, down there, and we had students who enjoyed what we called setting a door, which meant they would put a small stone so the door wouldn't close all the way. Then on the weekend, they would open the door and go in and shoot baskets.
Yep.
So
I did that when I was in high school.
yeah, well, I suspect when I looked at you, I said,
Detention coming your way.
"He looks familiar." But what would happen then, the police would come down in the early morning hours and check the doors. And so when they'd find one that was set, I'd get a phone call. Now this is 3 o'clock in the morning, so now I'm getting out of bed, going down to the old high school, and the police wait for me, and they say, this was the door that was set. So they said, we're going. So they waved goodbye, and there I would be.
to make certain it was all okay?
That was the only door that was set. So now you're climbing through this old building, and you never knew how much noise an old building could make.
Right.
So I inspect it and then go home. So eventually I was relieved of that duty. I forget who got it, but someone else got it.
Oh, shoot. So fire drills and tornado drills. Intruders, did you really have to plan much back in the day for an intruder coming into the building? Or Okay.
No.
Safety. How much does that encompass of your time as a principal and planning and thinking things through and updating the plans, et cetera?
Sure, and we are fortunate. We have Dan Grotehouse, who really leads that up, and I put Dan up against anybody in the state, and I know he's even one of the best in the country. And Dan Grotehouse is down in the Ohio State House usually, and giving his 2 cents about school safety and transportation. So we're fortunate that we have one of the best leaders of school safety in our district, and that's really pushed the initiative here in St. Mary City Schools. We have an extensive safety plan, and it is thick. And not everything can even be shared with the public, but fire drills are interesting. Our new trainings we have fire drills, and you have to have one every month, but they don't call them fire drills anymore. Nobody's died in a school fire since 1952. And so now there's school evacuation drills or school safety drills. So you're more practicing the event of an active shooter, and you're evacuating the closest door. And we have accountability that we do, and we've got it's a pretty thorough system that we have with different leaders in different sections, using radios and cell phones and trying to make sure that every student's accounted for. I was over at Wapak a couple years ago when they did a full-scale drill and enacted a shooter, and students are running out of the building with their hands up, and we've done that without the students at St. Mary's Schools last fall. So just practicing communication, what would happen if just everything went bad. So we've got plans for that. We have to do a lockdown drill. We got to do 3 lockdown drills a year. We have different protocols for all kinds of different situations. Whether we're an angry parent in the office, how are we going to respond? We've got buttons around the building and in our offices. So if an active shooter were spotted, there's a button you can push, and it signals the police and sheriff departments, and they'll be there. I think their response time is less than 2 minutes.
And speaking of law enforcement, how often was a police officer regularly in your building?
Not very often.
We have a school resource officer. This is our 2nd year in having one, maybe even 3. So this is St. Mary's police officer who's contracted with the school. They're there every day.
Probably done.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, that's an aspect that has changed, and it's probably just going to become how things are always part of a high school. And going back to your very voluminous plan, it's great to have a voluminous plan, but you need to know what's in it.
Right.
And that's all the training and the retooling and rethinking of what's in the plan in different circumstances. So that's got to take a lot of time with Dan Grotehouse and everybody else, because if it's just Dan and you that know the plan, that's not going to be effective.
Correct.
Yeah, I would think communicating that information from the plan into the teachers would be a time-consuming operation.
And it takes away from instructional
Right.
leadership. And
That's
that's
what I
been
was
one of the
saying.
complaints from the administration is we are spending almost all of our PD time on school safety, which is great. And I feel like our teachers are very well prepared for anything that we can throw at them. But at the same time, you know, we're trying to drive assessments and drive instructional leadership, and that has taken kind of a back seat here for several years.
So interesting on the aspect of safety. Let's talk discipline real quick. The troublemakers in the school and what you recall were maybe some of the most common vices that students would try to pull, and how you dealt with.
Well, I always tried to forget all those things.
I'm not talking about you as a student, as a principal.
Okay. Well, we had the usually lack of respect and unwillingness to work. These are probably the major things. Having conflicts with teachers, and then teachers being frustrated, not knowing how to continue. And of course, then the first thing was the removal of the student from the school. Are you talking about what we did with these?
And how you handled certain situations. Like was smoking much of a problem during your tenure?
Well, it became a problem, yes, more so as the years went by, especially in the smoking in the restrooms.
Yeah.
And
Fighting?
Yes, fighting. There's some fighting going on, and you'd have to have possible school suspensions on smoking and fighting, especially the aggressor, and maybe even court action you could eventually do. We had to go a couple times to court, to the courthouse. So.
And your suspensions, they were out of school suspensions, I presume?
Yes, most of them were. We did have in-school suspensions, and we did, if there wasn't a home situation, we weren't just turning them loose. And then we had Saturday school. We started doing Saturday school, which was somewhat effective. But then I was very envious because I think after I left, they became having alternative schools where they were able to remove the student from the whole setting and then give him educational opportunities in Wapak. I think that's where it was.
Yep.
Okay. And so I think they improved in that area quite a bit. We were somewhat limited in our means of reacting to disbehaving students.
Sure.
Misbehaving.
Sure. Mr. Burke?
It's interesting because not a whole lot has changed in terms of discipline. Student apathy would probably be the number one thing that we deal with. And then that teacher getting frustrated, making those comments to the student talks back, student's in trouble. And I feel like in the office that we're kind of mitigating a lot of those relationships and trying to rebuild those relationships. And we definitely have, probably not so much cigarette smoking anymore, but the vapes. And now they've even evolved into THC oil and marijuana oil inside the vapes. And kids are pretty slick with it too. A lot of vapes you'll see the big poof of smoke go up in the air, but kids can do things where you can smoke it and you don't see any smoke at all. You can blow it down your sweatshirt. But beginning of the year, you would walk in the bathroom about any time and probably catch somebody. And I feel like now we're at a point where we've got a pretty good thumb on it. And we're probably not perfect, but
do you
that's definitely
suspend
going on.
from school much?
We're hard on I would say drugs and fighting are the things
Two
that we're not going to put up with. But we try to keep kids in school because they need to be there, and they, as you know, they have to get their instruction and get their work done. But if you fight, you're out. And there's just, for the vaping, we've tried to do Saturday schools, and then we're trying to tie in an educational piece to it. There's a online program that we're using through the Sheriff's Department for next school year, that if you go to a Saturday school, you're going to do a 2-hour course to learn why you shouldn't be vaping and the causes
Excellent.
or the
That's
harms
awesome.
that you're doing. So, and it's interesting that you talked about, we have Opportunity School. So alternative school used to be at the ESC at Wapak for the longest time. And we just brought that back this school year in-house. So we're doing it in-house. And Mr. Meinerding was our assistant principal in the last 5 years. He's running it.
Okay.
And it's been great for our kids because now we've got eyes on them. But we can be a little bit more creative with what we do educationally for them, and understand that those kids probably are not your tradition. They're not best served by your traditional classroom. And computers and technology have really helped being able to cater education to certain pockets of kids, high end and low end. When I was an algebra teacher, I could put kids on, there's a program called ALEX, and you take a test and you go through the curriculum. So I had an 8th grader taking Algebra 1 who was doing calculus in the back of my room with my facilitating and help. And Mr. Meinerding's able to do that with Opportunity School, and kids can knock out their course requirements, but then go work the rest of the day and check in on them on work and make sure, you check in with the manager and say, hey, are they showing up? Are they doing a good job? If they're not, then they come right back and they get doing more work in all day. So there's incentive for those kids to do well at work because they want out and they want to go earn a paycheck.
So one aspect that I just thought of school discipline that we didn't touch on, it's an oldie but a goodie, and some people would say, that's nothing to do with discipline. The dress code, or more so, the violators of the dress code.
Are there dress codes now?
It's in the handbook.
It's in the handbook.
Loose. Yeah.
Well, I think our worst situation was the length of skirts. I remember that as being a big, and hair length, which are now, you wonder, why did we spend so much time being concerned about those two issues? But we did.
That's interesting.
Interesting that you brought that up, because when we did the episode on Prof. Kohler, we had some correspondence, and I want to say his last name was Holdren right now, and I may be wrong about that, but he was talking about Prof. Kohler and how he was the greatest and he was the only one that stood up for him because of his long hair.
Long hair.
Mm-hmm.
And the long hair was really not real long hair. Like the first Beatles, you look at it and say, well, what was the big concern about?
Yeah.
So,
And shorts are an everyday occurrence, even when it's 10 below.
Really cold, yeah.
And that wasn't.
No, that wasn't a concern at that time. We didn't have that particular problem, if it's a problem.
Right.
Yeah, so you're right, the perception of what is a problem, and then when you look back, was it really a problem?
Yeah,
it definitely is a problem, depending upon what it is. So, yeah, I just, obviously, the assistant principal gets charged with taking care of the dress code, and that's got to be something that they just absolutely love doing.
You're
enforcing
never
that. Yeah. Alrighty, we're going to take a commercial break and come back with this day in history, and then follow up with the second half of the interview with two Memorial High School principals, one former Quint Clark and one current, Jonathan Burke.
This segment of tonight's broadcast has been brought to you by Minster Bank, helping people achieve financial success in support of the Rider Nation and the St. Mary's community. The Evening Leader, chronicling the history of St. Mary's for over 100 years. And like a good neighbor, Lori Yelton, your local State Farm agent, is there.
This day in history, Saturday and Monday, May 27th and 29th, 1967, as May 28th was on a Sunday. Making the headline in the Evening Leader, quarantine of dogs, other pets may be necessary. Dr. Robert Oyer, Auglaize County Health Commissioner, issued the warning after 3 skunks were found to be rabid within the past 10 days in Shelby County. Also making headlines, St. Mary's firemen attend prevention seminar. Fire Chief Eddie Weiner, Captain Jack Mason Brink, Fireman Carl Kraft were in Columbus where they attended the 2-day seminar. On Tuesday, the entire force held a ladder drill at Bunker Hill School. Good place for a ladder drill. Robert J. Wells, Moulton principal, teacher, resigns. The Moulton Local School Board of Education recently accepted the resignation of Principal Wells. The board then hired Earl Campbell to fill his position. Now that guy was a disciplinarian just by looking at him. He had a hand that was about that big and such a gentle giant.
A gentle giant.
Also, Brian Hirschfeld, a second Memorial High School student, invited to display science project at the Ohio State Junior Science Exhibit. Brian is a biology student of John Smith. His project is titled Drink What? And focuses on the seriousness of water pollution in our country. Brian shares the honor with Raymond Dingledine, a senior at Memorial High School. Also found in the Evening Leader, a paid advertisement that I thought was worthy of sharing. It was a letter written to the community, specifically to the students. A letter of congratulations to the graduates of the class of 1967. You are to be the future leaders of the communities in which you choose to live. We hope it will be in this immediate area where the possibilities are unlimited. Good luck in the future, and may everything go well for you. We believe as parents, the community owes a debt of gratitude to the devoted teachers in this area. Recurrent achievements of youth, as publicized in a newspaper recently, is positive proof of years of devoted guidance to our youth. We support all youth movements that are in the local area. As results indicate, they pay off. To name a few, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Junior Achievement, FFA, FHA, Youth for Christ, etc. We believe our churches and the many fine parish leaders we have in the area had a most direct influence on our youth. And last but certainly not least, we congratulate the proud parents of our fine youth today. Paid for by everyone at Kellermeyer's Men's Clothing Store. Great business of St. Mary's on Spring Street. So I thought that was just worthy of reading off for the paid advertisement in 1967. Again, thank you to the following sponsors: Lori Elton State Farm, Minster Bank, the Evening Leader. Stay local the best that you can, and tell them thanks for supporting Rider Nation Station. Alrighty, back to the similarities and differences of Memorial High School today versus the time when Principal Clark was the top educator. Teacher evaluations. Quint, what was the process like for you to do teacher evaluations?
Well, we would set up a time that we would come in to do an evaluation. We usually announced it ahead of time because we did want to see them at their best. And then we come in and evaluate them, then have a meeting afterwards and review the different areas that we thought they were strong at, and usually they were mostly positive. Mm-hmm. And if there's some areas we thought needed some working, we would try to make suggestions from our experience and watching other successful teachers, and see if they would try to consider those to introduce into their teaching.
And did you have a checklist,
Yes.
an objective checklist
Right.
of what you're looking for?
Right.
And then
We had a tool there that they had that information ahead of time, knowing what areas that it would be looked at.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And for you, Mr. Burke.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Principal Clark, was that tool, did you make it? Did your teachers use it? Where did that come from?
Well, I think that was one that just kind of evolved over the years.
Just the principals putting it together?
Right, putting it together
Okay.
and adding, subtracting, and of course we made sure the teacher had that form also, because they should know what would be looked at in that.
And was it every teacher that you had to evaluate, or were the seasoned teachers, they're good?
No, we were required to evaluate all teachers
Okay.
as part of the policy.
Okay.
Sure. The state passed, this might have been 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even 7 or 8. We have a rubric, and we have the Ohio teacher evaluation system. And so 50% of a teacher's evaluation is based on that rubric, that performance rating, and there's 10 areas. The first couple are mostly how you plan instruction, and are you aligned to the standards, how you get to know your kids. And then we have lesson delivery with the resources, the actual lesson delivery, and how you're differentiating your classroom. And then also the assessment piece. So there's a couple parts on the assessment, and then professionalism is the last one on there. How you get along with your colleagues, and how do you communicate with your students, your parents, the community. And then the other 50% of your evaluation is based on student growth. And so that's either your state test or the test that you make, and then the kids take a pre-test and then take a test at the end of the course. So those all get dumped into this website, and it has some formula and dumps out what your rating is.
On the pre-test and post-test, it's the same test.
Correct.
The teacher creates it. Does anybody have to approve
Yes.
that test?
So we have a building leadership team that when this first came out 7 or 8 years ago, they had to build the test as a department and get approved by either the department itself and the other teachers, or if you're like a Spanish teacher, for example, you don't have much of a department, so you have to get it approved by local area Spanish teachers.
Oh, okay.
And so that test has to get approved, and then, yeah, they take it at the beginning of the year, put in all those, and then there's a formula for growth. The state, you have to get a 50% growth measure. So if you have an 18%, kids got to get like a 53% at least for you to meet your growth percentage as a teacher.
That's quite a difference. In what there's one other part of the evaluation equation was that we also had the teachers evaluate the administration at the end of each year.
Yeah.
So that was just a secondary thing.
Things Mr. Burke didn't want you to bring up.
Yeah, we're cutting that out.
How long does it take you to do, I think OTES is the acronym that it goes by. How much time does that consume of your principalship?
It depends on a full year evaluation. So we have cycles. On a full year evaluation, you have to do a full evaluation in the fall and in the spring, and you've got to fill out all the checklists and do the notes, and then you put in everything in the website, and then you put in the growth measure at the end. So there's accomplished, skilled, developing, and effective. Most teachers fall in skilled, most because the rubric is kind of wide enough that you're going to kind of fit in skilled. We have highly accomplished teachers that if you get that as your final ranking, you get evaluated a full evaluation every 3 years. So it kind of gives principals a break, but then on your off year, you're not fully evaluated, but you have walkthroughs. So we have 5 walkthroughs we have to do. It's 10 minutes each. Check mark them that you've been in the classroom and give feedback. Those are just check boxes, to be honest with you.
So teacher evaluations and safety requirements, do you actually get to...
You do any?
Well, those are the best days is when I get to go into a classroom.
I know,
Yeah.
at least you're
And
doing that. Yeah.
The unfortunate part is like this is the time of year where I have the most time to get into a classroom, because we have laptops where I don't have to be in my office tied to my desk. I can go out and answer emails in a teacher's classroom, but this is not the time of year they want me with a week to go.
Yeah.
They don't want me in their room right now because they're doing more fun things. They're wrapping up the end of the year and that sort of thing. But yeah, I wish I had more time. Those days that I get in the classrooms, even if it's 20 minutes,
Yep.
those are the best days.
Excellent.
Now,
Excellent.
do you have an assistant principal?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, and he handles all the discipline.
Okay, he does the discipline.
And school safety. He logs the drills that we do. He organizes the drills. So yeah.
Staff turnover. Going to somewhat equate this to free agency in baseball. You know, you used to be able to always know who the team was from year to year to year. Is that how it was back in your day, that a teacher got a job at St. Mary's Memorial High School and they stayed there until retirement?
Yeah.
Or was there a decent amount of turnover?
Well, we had the long-term teachers, Prof. Kohler and Gert Geiger and Lillian Coddington. I could go ahead and name it. There seemed to be relatively little turnover. When the student body started to increase, then you were adding staff, so that's where we started to get new blood, new young teachers, and taking over for the older ones.
Okay. So I know one that was a turnover for you, and that was my dad. He decided what in 1971 or something.
He said,
it's time to go.
Time to go.
Do something else. So, is it like free agency today, or is it like the baseball teams of the 70s, where you knew who the
was
team
gonna
was
be
year to year to year?
For the last couple of years, we really haven't had any turnover at the middle school, high school level. And we have a lot of long-term teachers that have been in St. Mary City schools. Where I taught outside of Chicago, that's how it was. If you hit March, April, everybody's trying to go to the higher paying school. And around here, it's pretty equitable. You might get paid more salary, but then you're losing out on insurance. Or, stipends might be off by couple $100 here or there, but in
From
the
school
grand scheme
district
of
to
things,
school district.
right? If you compare New Bremen, Wapak, Salina, Van Wert, we're pretty much all in the ballpark. There's only so much money in the pot. It's a matter of how you're going to divvy it out. As far as health insurance is raised a lot just in the last couple of years, but yeah, everybody around here is pretty on the same level field or playing field.
Okay, so and that's got to make it pretty awesome knowing that you've got the same staff coming back. You don't have to go through that onboarding or induction period every time. Now you're going to have that one or two people, but
Right.
not in large mass. Parent support. Let's start with you, Mr. Burke. Is that something that is definitely a positive, or are parents too busy, maybe working second shifts, that things could be better? I don't know
Yeah.
how to quite ask this one.
Right, and I think we have a lot of great positive parent support. If it weren't for parents, we wouldn't have after prom. Our football moms just kind of take over and take care of those kids and the cheerleaders and that whole program. So we have a lot of parents involved. If anything's changed, it's just the family dynamic of, families aren't eating dinner together. There's a lot more divorced families, single parent families, remarriages, and it works for families, and kids adapt, and but it's different than it probably was. But that's probably the biggest change, is how busy families are these days, whether they are working second shift or kids are in so many sports and activities. For example, I had open gym with my basketball girls tonight from 4:30 to 5:30. I see them go over to the tennis courts right after that, or they have volleyball practice after that. And so right now, there's all three sports are about to hit hard. Volleyball for girls, it's volleyball, basketball, soccer, softball, all hit in June. For boys, it's the same thing. Boys were in the gym right after us. Everybody wants a piece of that kid, and just the nature of competition has forced that to be year-round. Where I think it's really important for families these days to take time. You've got to find time during the week to be a family, especially in the summers. Your kids graduate from high school so quickly. You've got to take time as a family to go on vacations and spend that time together, because it goes fast, and all of a sudden they're all over the place, and it's hard to bring them back.
It definitely does. I can attest to that, as my son's graduating here in a few days, and it just seems totally unfathomable that is possible. Parental support during your tenure as principal?
Well, we thought we had excellent support. Of course, one of the tests of a support was how did your levies do, and at that time H.H. Cook was the superintendent, and Frank Dennings, junior high, and then assistant superintendent. People, I think, had a lot of faith and trust, and if Mr. Cook said the school needed some additional money, I think the people generally supported that and said he wouldn't ask for it if it wasn't so. And I think that was the attitude at that time, as we had the same board members over a number of years, and it was a very constant, steady procedure.
So let's jump from parent support to community support, the businesses, and I think Business Advisory Council you have today. Talk a little bit about that, and then just businesses in general and community, how they support the schools.
And I think we benefit a lot from the local businesses and corporations that we have in our area. We have a Business Advisory Council that meets once a month, and we meet, it's the high school principal, middle school principal, some guidance counselors, so some representatives from the school, and then Dan Hosick from was AAP, now it's a new name,
Co-sign.
Abby Bolster, Mike Burkholder, there's a couple others. There's the representative from Omni. So we get together and just talk about, one, how can the school better serve the needs of the community? So are we recruiting right now? We're trying to get more engineers back. Can we get a better training of engineers here locally and then get them back? Because right now they go off to college and they're going off to bigger cities where those jobs are. We've got a lot of growth right here in Auglaize and Mercer County that we would like to bring those kids back or train them locally so they stay. And we have our football field project, and we're blessed with so many donations from local businesses and community members that project wouldn't happen if it weren't for so many generous donations. And it's amazing to me, every board meeting we have $500, $2,000, $5,000 donations that are being accepted for the different projects that if a teacher reaches out and asks for some kind of donation for whatever's going on, somebody steps up. It's incredible. We have incredible support.
Awesome to hear. What do you recall on the business support? Was there anything like the Business Advisory Council that he was talking
No,
about?
I think it was mainly person to person.
Mm-hmm.
And the businesses, at that time, I don't think we had maybe the number that they have today and the scope of them. We had Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company and a few of the big ones.
And they definitely supported. I remember watching the movies in class, and
Mm-hmm.
it was always the introduction before, brought to you by the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, and they had footage of the local
The
plant.
plant. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So obviously they were a big supporter of the schools. Would company officials come in and say, we need to focus more on getting people educated, as Jonathan was just saying, engineering. Did they have anything specific that they were after that they needed the school to do for them?
I can't answer that because I pass on that question. He told me
that's
I
coming
could
up.
pass. I could pass if I didn't
So
want
you
to
used
know.
one.
Yeah. How many do I get?
You only get 4.
Oh, geez. That may be one. I'll answer that question. Yeah.
All right, athletics and clubs. Now, that's got to be a fun aspect in most regard of being a principal and watching your student athletes perform and achieve highly and see growth and be part of a club that maybe a kid wouldn't have had an opportunity, such as the archery club that we brought up earlier with Mrs. Urich. What do you recall about athletics and clubs?
Well, when we started, the number of clubs were somewhat limited, but as we went through the years, and especially Title IX developed a lot of equality and brought along the women's sports, and so they ended up having, softball, track, tennis, everything that the boys. Originally, we had football, basketball, and baseball is about what we offered our students. And then, of course, the girls would have GAA, which was Girls Athletic Association, where it was in-house and maybe competing with some other schools, but very limited. But as time went on and Title IX came along, I think the opportunities for our girls increased a great amount. And we found coaches for them, and that's an important aspect of school, is having the student have a chance to have an activity, not just have 6 classes or something like that.
Right. And for you?
This has been an awesome year in sports for me as principal.
We should have had you be principal a long time ago.
I've been to the State House and received resolutions for state champions in bowling and girls powerlifting. It was funny, Mr. Ruane and I were just talking today, and he's never had a resolution. We got another one because our cafeteria won the gold plate, which was a really high honor from the health department that they got such good ratings. And we got another resolution from Representative Riedel. Mr. Ruane said, I never got one of these. We didn't know what to do with them. Where do we frame them? Where do we hang them? So it's a unique thing. But yeah, we had girls soccer won WBL championships, golf won WBL championship, football won a WBL championship, and went to the Final Four of state. We had boys that participated at state and swim. just mentioned bowling, boys and girls went to state, girls powerlifting. We've got a relay team and a long jumper and Tai Hao right now who are competing at regionals through track. So this has been an incredible year for sports. As a first-year principal, I got to go on that playoff journey during the football season. That was a lot of fun. And even our sports that maybe didn't win a WBL championship, we were competitive in every sport this season, or this school year. We were just shy of the All Sports Trophy for the WBL. We just lost to Shawnee by a couple points, and that really comes down to maybe a match and a tennis match or a game of in basketball. And it doesn't even mean if it's St. Mary's versus Shawnee. It could just mean any random game. So this has been a great year as far as sports, and I feel like we're heading in a good direction. Whenever you have coaches in-house, it helps our kids. Yep. And we've got a lot of in-house coaches, and the coaches who are not teachers are very close. They communicate well with Mr. Holman, our AD, and the coaches that we work with. As girls basketball coach, I work with Nick Wilson, who's a physical therapist, but we communicate through email, and he's my neighbor down the street. So
And he's the girls soccer coach.
And he's girls soccer coach. So we just have really good relationships as coaching staffs too, and that helps because you are sharing so many kids. And as I said earlier, just time is limited, and so you get what you can out of kids. But it goes fast, and so as far as sports and activities go, we're at a high peak right now, and I think we're still heading up too, which is more exciting.
And clubs you've got a lot of clubs, and
so yeah, here's a new one that we could be opening up an esports club next school year. So we've got kids that are signed up. We've got a sponsor.
pretty certain you didn't have this.
What was it again?
It's esports. So it's video games.
Oh, very. No, I don't think we did.
No, and not next year, but there is a future down the road that there's schools that have it for a varsity sport right now.
I'll be there.
So that's something. Van Wert has a robotics club it's a winter varsity sport, and my hope is in the next couple of years that we can do a robotics club or something along those lines. We're opening up a STEM class next year that I'm excited about. So hopefully some of those things will come along too.
It sounds exciting.
Yeah.
So the last topic, technology, and the integral role that technology plays in the everyday life of the student at Memorial High School today.
Yeah.
Chromebooks, Wi-Fi.
Right. You can't stay on top of it, and you can't keep enough technology coming in. So every year we think we get set up with enough Wi-Fi access points and enough broadband in the sky. I don't know what all that is, but
The magic juice that makes it work.
Exactly, the magic juice that makes your computer work. We think we have enough, and we constantly hit the end of the year and think we need to revamp and we need to add more juice. So right now we're in our first year of one-to-one Chromebook implementation at 6th grade and freshman year. Next year that'll carry on, so we'll have 6th, 7th, and then 9th and 10th grades will be one-to-one with Chromebooks. We're not far off from every person having 3 devices. A cell phone, a Chromebook or a laptop, and then probably a tablet. A lot of kids are carrying around 3 devices. And it's funny, you go to a principal's meeting or administrator meeting and everybody has their phones, their laptops. You're getting calls, texts, emails, all while you're listening to a presentation that could be over a webcam or,
Right.
It's interesting. It's interesting, but the multitasking definitely makes things unique.
And the teachers incorporate the technology into the lessons every day in the classroom. They're not even called whiteboards.
Blackboard.
They're smart boards.
The smart
Blackboard.
boards. Yeah.
Blackboard.
We'll get to your
I
technology
missed
here in
that
a
as a
second.
math
I
teacher.
just gave you my technology. That's it.
You had the mimeograph
Yeah. So, and the overhead projector.
and the overhead projector
And the tape recorder. Okay.
and the film strip.
And the films.
That's
Yeah,
when
that
things
was
really
one at a
went.
time.
Yeah. It's kind of
That's it,
unbelievable,
yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
that,
I listen
everything.
to this, and I just am overwhelmed. I don't know how you keep up with all this.
I don't. That's what the kids are for. They tell you what you're missing.
Okay.
So And there had to be some introductions, like the film strip. I mean, if we forget what we just heard and go back to, hey, we're introducing the film strip, and you're going to be slide by slide be able to see a presentation of some sort.
Right.
That had to be wild. And I can still remember as a kid that there would be a tone that dropped, and that meant to rotate to the next slide. And everybody was raising their hands. Oh, let me be the film strip guy, so I can. That was big stuff.
That was. Yes.
So there were some of the technological advancements that were introduced, but nothing at the rapid pace.
The rate
that
of.
It's true.
You have to deal with and try to stay ahead and keep a technology budget going, because things are processing so fast. So interesting aspects, and so it was a little more than a blackboard for you, but not as much as
Nothing in comparison to what
Yep.
Doug.
All righty. Last thing before we take our break and done with the interview aspect of the vodcast today, one takeaway that you want viewers to have about the role of principal or just the high school in general while you were there.
Well, I think the most important thing is to have community support and have a staff that is interested in students, like students, and want them to do the best that they can. And that's pretty much, I think, what I think.
And that's excellent advice. And just like with anything, with raising your kids or marriage or a job or a sports team, not everything's going to go exactly as you diagrammed. But everybody's doing it for the for the ultimate goal of getting kids educated and hopefully becoming those good solid, productive citizens. Yep. Mr. Burke?
Same thing. There's nothing that's the same thing that continues today is know your kids. Education and good education comes down to knowing your kids. Know your kids, know your kids, know your kids. And so we preach that, and I think our staff does an amazing job of reaching our kids at whatever level they're at, social, emotional, or academic, and pushing them and helping them along. But as you said, community support. And I also think that I am accessible. And I know that there may be people out on Facebook who watch this and have questions and things like that. And I am accessible, so email and call, and that's what I'm here for. I'm the community liaison between parents and staff and students, and that's, I'm busy, but that's my job.
That's your job.
And so I always encourage people, if they have questions and concerns, or if they feel like we're not doing a good enough job in one thing or another, to reach out. And we might not have the answer now, but can we work on it and work together and figure out solutions? So in terms of what I would like people to take away from the role as a principal is we are accessible, and we're here to serve our community. We're not here for anything else. We're here for the kids, and we're here to build this community because these kids are going to grow up here. They're going to have families here. And even if they go off somewhere else for now, their roots are here, and their ties are back here. They care.
Yep.
When I was away for a while, whether it was college or when we moved away, you still check in on your hometown. So we want to build that, and whether you're here or local, we're all in this together.
And that's part of our mission here at Rider Nation Station, is to connect those dots to people who do live here, who did live here, and maybe who will live here, and know that this is a great community. And when you think of St. Mary's, the first thing you're probably going to think of is the school. And so I greatly appreciate the two of you talking about your jobs as principal and all that it entails, and know that I don't want your job. And
Don't you want my job? I'm retired.
I'm trying to get there. Yes, trying to get there. And as we do these podcasts are for today, but more importantly, they're for posterity. And it's going to be interesting 50 years from now when you come back and you're sitting here and the current high school principal and talking about the similarities and differences.
Can't imagine what it'll be like 50 years from now.
Nope.
Oh, I know.
It's amazing.
I couldn't imagine either. I'll still be working.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can see it. All righty, so we're going to take a commercial break, and we're going to come back with Rider Nation's word association activity.
This segment of Rider Nation Station has been brought to you by Albert Sporting Goods at 121 West Spring Street, serving the St. Mary's community since 1980. Plus One Professionals Real Estate, selling St. Mary's from the corner of Spring and Chestnut since 1982.
All righty, welcome back. It's time for Rider Nation Station Word Association. And I'm going to give a word to each one of these fine gentlemen, and the first thing that pops to their mind, they're going to state, and if they want to elaborate a little bit, they definitely can, and if you just have nothing, you say pass. We'll see who wins.
What's the prize?
Laura, what's the prize? Jonathan, the 1923 auditorium.
Oh, the seats. I remember the seats, the wood back seats, and I've got one of the armrests in my office, the wooden armrest, but the metal chairs. I remember the metal chairs with the wood seats.
Yep. Quint, the 1923 auditorium. First thing that pops to your mind.
Crowded. Used for graduation.
Oh.
Wow.
And
And basketball practice.
And that's
basketball
the stage.
games.
Games.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Before
Yeah.
McBroom.
Before McBroom
Okay.
played the games there. And
Wow.
on the one wall, the line was on the wall. So to take the ball out, you had to
Wow.
put your foot back on the wall
You
and
had to
pass the ball. And then they had the areas above, the cages we called them,
Wow.
where you'd look down onto them, and then you'd bother the other players. So that was, I pass. No.
No, you did. You won that one. St. Mary's putt-putt. What do you remember about the putt-putt? Think
Where Dave's
Pass.
Barbecue is now?
where Dave's Barbecue is now.
Oh.
I grew up on that course. I set a record at Myrtle Beach on a putt-putt course growing up. St. Mary's
played so
putt-putt
much
course.
there. Oh, that's right. There was a putt-putt. Yeah, I did
Yeah.
not recall it.
Yep,
I
yep.
remember the windmill. That's about it.
A lot of after prom activities that was one.
One of the everyone did.
Stops.
We used to
Yep.
want to keep kids in town, so they
Yep,
don't get
yep.
out in the
And-
highways.
That's interesting.
And I'll add in, it was the long drive putt-putt where you actually hit the ball as hard as you could. There's a big backstop.
Is that right?
Yeah, and then that was the hole. It probably had to be the only place I've ever seen a putt-putt like that.
What year are you thinking right here of that Dave's putt-putt was?
So that the putt-putt was 70s and the 80s, and probably shut down late 90s, mid-90s.
My gosh, is it that long? Okay. I should remember that.
Yep. All right, Mr. Burke may have a pass here. Murph,
I don't know this one.
there's a
I
pass.
don't know this one.
What do you remember about Murph?
Murph was our man about town, and he was assistant to Coach Bachman
Yep,
and a town character.
yep. Yeah, someday we may have to do a podcast on Murph. Yeah, because he was legendary here. All right, so it's tied.
Yeah. Oh, tied with passes.
And the last one, Albert Sporting Goods.
Well, owned and operated by Kay Albert, and he was a guidance counselor during my tenure down there, and a very good one, and then became athletic director, and now his son runs the store, and that's about all I know about Albert's, except they service a lot of schools.
They do.
Yeah, and they've grown a lot. Lyle runs
Lyle
the
does a
business
good
now,
job.
and his son,
Zach,
puts on. I mean, he's in the Columbus area, I think, and now they've got online shops. That they work with so many schools now, and it's not just New Knoxville, St. Mary's. We work very closely with Albert Sporting Goods. If it weren't for them, but we get all of our equipment and jerseys from them.
And they are a fine sponsor of Rider Nation Station. All righty, thanks for participating, and no winners. You
Good.
guys
I thought it
tied.
was a tie.
You guys
Yeah.
tied. Thanks for participating in the Rider Nation Station Word Association, and make certain that you thank the sponsors. Stay local the best that you can. Tell them thanks for supporting Rider Nation Station. Well, we have come to the end of our show. It is our hope at Rider Nation Station this podcast did entertain, educate, enlighten, and elevate your perspective about St. Mary's, Ohio. We hope a story has been told that augments the development of relationships, old and new, to promote growth for all who do, did, and will call St. Mary's, Ohio home. If you've got stories that you thought of while listening to Mr. Burke and Mr. Clark, make certain that you send them in to ridernationstation@gmail.com or comment in the Facebook page or on the YouTube page. Again, I want to thank former Principal Quint Clark, current Principal Jonathan Burke for sharing their stories of a day in the life of an MHS principal. Rider Nation Station will be airing the 2019 Baccalaureate and commencement ceremony. Keynote address is by alumni Mr. Bruce Lawler. So we will be airing that on the Rider Nation Station as well as TSC. I hope you think positively about our town. The town we did not inherit from our ancestors, but the town we borrowed from our grandchildren. Peace to you, my fellow St. Marians, always and always.
This episode of Rider Nation Station has been sponsored by American Manufacturing Solutions, your total logistic partner, investing in the St. Mary's community. Albert Sporting Goods at 121 West Spring Street, serving the St. Mary's community since 1980. Plus One Professionals Real Estate, selling St. Mary's from the corner of Spring and Chestnut since 1982. Minster Bank, helping people achieve financial success and supporter of the Rider Nation and the St. Mary's community. The Evening Leader, chronicling the history of St. Mary's for over 100 years. Like a good neighbor, Laura Yelton, your local State Farm agent, is there.